Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics live show, the second of the preseason. We are recording live on Sunday, the 12th of January, ahead of the 2025 AFL Fantasy season. And today we'll be looking at defenders, which I think the consensus across the community at the moment is it is the trickiest line to fill out in terms of just really players that we're wanting to look for value. There's not as much value, or the players are on the buy, but we'll be discussing all that and plenty of other options. But I'm your host, Bales, and you can find me at BAILSDT across the socials. And for if you are obviously listening live as well and would like a question answered or player discussed, please put it in the live chat on YouTube and we'll answer those towards the end of the show. But joining me as always is my co-host and fellow fantasy fanatic. It is Jordox. Jordox, mate, how are you?
Good, mate. Good to see you. Really excited for our guest tonight. And yeah, like you said, the back line, in years gone past, it's hard to kind of miss in the back line. There's always plenty there. And I'm sure there's plenty there this year. I think the challenge is, who are they? It's just hard to know that at this point. So looking forward to getting into it and talking through some names with you guys.
Exactly right. No, looking forward to it. And we'll be introducing a guest in a sec. But for all those people that are watching live or on the replay on YouTube, or if you're listening even to the podcast, make sure you do smash a like on the video on YouTube as well. And also, our goal before the start of the season is to hit 3,000 subscribers. We've got a fair few people subscribe on the last video, so appreciate all the new subscribers there. But if you haven't already, please make sure you do so we can hit 3,000. I believe we're about 160 or so subscribers away. So let's get that goal done. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. Very much appreciated. But joining us are two very special guests. And we've gone to the top of the tree from last year. It is the number one coach last year. He's got a new Hilux. He's Chris, coach of No Idea. Chris, mate, how are you?
Very good. Thanks, Bales. Thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. And yeah, talking the hardest line of the field, I reckon, this time. Exactly
right. It'd be remiss if we sort of started the episode without talking defenders. But obviously, you've got on all the pods, and you've obviously said how good it was last year. But sort of, what's the feeling been like? A couple of months removed from obviously winning AFL Fantasy Classic last year, something that I just dream of getting a hat, let alone winning the whole comp. Sort of, how's it sort of settled in as we head into 2025 and into a brand new AFL Fantasy season?
Definitely feel like the hunted now. I've had I think 3 top 1,000 finishes before, but like never getting a hat. So my goal was always to win a hat to eventually, and then go cool, I won a hat, let's turn it off. So to actually get number one, suddenly I'm like, ooh, maybe I know what I'm doing a little bit. So I'll give it a crack again this year. And it was good. The car didn't arrive until November, so it kind of prolonged the enjoyment of it as well. And that was good fun doing that with Melville Toyota, and as a Dockers fan as well myself, they let me know, they're like, Jai Amos is our representative, so he'll come out and do the promo with you. So that was pretty cool. And then obviously, I'm doing a bit of the podcast run around, which is so funny. Like, I during last season and the last couple of years, like smashing all the podcasts, listening to all the content, and then suddenly it's me that's on the content now, and people are asking me the questions, and I'm like, I know I was harvesting everyone else's ideas, and now you're asking me the ideas, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty much whenever you win AFL Fantasy Classic, you're going to be highly sought after in the off season, the pre-season, the following year, and for years to come as well. So, no, mate, we very much appreciate you jumping on with us today to chat. As we said, the trickiest position I think to fill out. But joining us is another very special guest. He's a very good friend of the pod. He's jumped on a number of times, which we very, very much appreciate. He is one of the members of the Free Kick W pod and the official AFL W fantasy podcast, enjoying a bit of the off season from that, but getting ready for another men's season. It is Liam from Free Kick. Liam, mate, how are you?
Well, I'm very good, Bales. It's this will be my second of the AFL pre-season. I was saying, I might be a bit rusty. And then I go, actually, no, I was podcasting solidly from like May through to November. So it was like a month off before I did another one. So I'm keen to talk defenders. I just wanted to say something, Chris. Have you considered talking to the AFL about when you win the car, it should also come with a microphone and podcasting setup, because I honestly think that would be such a benefit. Because it's just like, oh, you're going to be put on the podcast tour. Here's a little streamer kit for you if you don't have one already.
Oh, and I mean, I think I also, obviously Telstra sponsoring the AFL. I've got Telstra Internet, and I did Mitch's podcast the other day, and it sounded like I was underwater, and I was like, I want to say this is sponsored by Telstra today.
Oh, mate, love it. Always internet, always causing issues, but seems all good today. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get through that. That's what happens with live shows. You got to hope the internet holds true. But we are talking defenders, as we have said on the top. So we'll go through a couple of points to discuss, I think, generally before we get into some player-specific names. So each of us have got 2 defender premiums and 2 mid-prices that we're keeping on and we want to discuss a little bit further. But just before we do that, I thought we'd go into a couple of points in terms of value. I think it's the first one, Chris, that is people's been struggling to find, or if they have found it, it's a lot of the players on the round 3 bye. I think you guys like a Matt Roberts, Callum Mills, Lawson Humphreys, Kadeem Coleman, Harry Perryman. There's a couple of other names. Well, even like if you want to go a little bit further in it, Max Holmes, Tom Stewart, Archie Roberts as well, that have got that early bye. So how are you attacking it, obviously, before we've watched any games, and how are you sort of looking at defenders? Because it's a little bit tricky, I think, for a lot of people at the moment.
Absolutely. The current structure I'm kind of rolling with is 3 players around that 800k mark, a top dog, and then obviously Kadeem Coleman. I think everyone's probably rolling with him, and then a rookie at the end. But a lot of it's a round 0 watch. I think that when I put my team together in 2024, I had a list of players that I was picking, and then all the alternates. And the alternates were all tagged as has a bye. So I was like, not picking these players, don't want to go the bye player. And then the round 0 scores come along, and suddenly Lockie Whitfield and all those kind of guys, you're like, well, I can't miss those. So I think the structure I've got right now, I'm definitely round 0 and having a bye is pretty much dictating my team right now, especially with that. It's had the popular bye with the Geelong, Collingwood, Sydney game. Like it's that just that if we could talk to the AFL and ask him for something, as you were saying, Liam, maybe we could ask him to change the fixtures around and mess those teams around a little bit, so we're not losing all our fantasy relevant players.
Yeah,
I would say that the AFL very clearly does not listen to any feedback that it gets on opening round whatsoever. So that would be falling on the deafest of deaf ears.
Particularly if it's to help out the fantasy community. Yeah. Anyhow, it is what it is, and we've got the challenge ahead of us with those extra ones. And it's an interesting sort of, because we had it last year, and I'm someone who, like you said, Chris, with Whitfield, I did resist because of the bye. I was just too nervous about those buys, and I ended up chasing him for half the year. So that's kind of been my thing this year, not to worry too much about the early buys, but the fact that there's an early buy with extra teams on it just complicates the whole thing.
And it impacts the rest of your structure as well, because you could go with a couple of them. So you go like a Mills, Coleman, and start to load up on them, and Perryman. But then that probably means you can't go Bailey Smith and I guess another one on that, like your Ashcrofts and those kind of guys. You almost have to limit your other lines then. So essentially, what you put in your defense will impact the rest of your squad.
Yeah, 100%. It's you can't have obviously too many of these players on that round 3 bye. Liam, your thoughts on the obviously struggle in sort of finding the value of, and particularly, I think we've touched on the guys of the buys, but obviously you mentioned and talking to me about the struggle with the top sort of 10 to 15 guys, that a lot of them are priced at either what they're going to do, maybe not much upside, and then they've even probably got a bit of downside in terms of changing in role, like your Shees will change midway through the year. You got the likes of Sam Flanders, Nick Martin have changed potential roles as well. And obviously Zorko had a career year, and he's a million years old. So what are your thoughts with those top sort of defenders?
I think that it's probably one of the toughest questions that we're going to need to answer, because I don't think for a lot of these players we are actually going to get answers that will make them easier to pick until we are weeks into the season. And I think that I think what has become a fairly common choice at the moment is, I've seen a number of people posting their teams, is to put Jack Sinclair in there. And I can say that I have recut the data in every way possible to try and, or not every way, a bunch of different ways to try and isolate when he has different role and what he averages. Basically, every role he plays, he averages between about 101 and 104. So in that respect, I don't hate it as a placeholder, but it does sit contrary to so many, like the driving force behind this game, which it is a find value wherever you can. So at the very least, I'm like trying to see if I can convince myself of one of the more premium options than Sinclair to at least say that there's some value. But also once you get, and this is something that Jaiden did last year, which is to kind of show the worthwhile averages you need. Once you get up above a certain price in a position, their worthwhile average actually might be below what they're priced at. So if we can convince ourselves of the Sheasel maintaining at 110, for example, then potentially you can make a case to actually start him and have yourself a captain score available. But I think that that's the thing at the moment. It's like, I understand the reaction to go, yeah, I'll just pick Sinclair as my D1 because it's easy. Like, I'm not stressed about how he's going to score, but I would say that it's probably the lazier option than trying to justify why someone who shows a premium like ceiling of over 150, as all of the top 5 guys have got, why it is that you aren't going to pick them.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I was guilty of that. I put Sinclair in for a big part of the preseason, and then I was sort of thinking, as you say, like there's not a huge amount of upside, so go for a cheaper option. And one of those options that's currently sitting at D1 is one of the players we'll be discussing later on. So I'll leave him for that. Jordox, in terms of the players that obviously expensive, I heard Mitch and Luke talking about it on their Defender Premiums pod, and obviously they were making the case for potentially a Harry Sheasel. Sort of as Liam was mentioning there, is you get your captain option and his worthwhile average isn't going to be as high. So what are your thoughts on starting with him? Because we're not going to touch on him in the other section. So just quickly touch on him as being the number one. And he's currently in nearly 40% of teams as well. So it's almost like it's a large portion. If he gets off to a quick start, you could be left a little bit behind the pack if these other defenders don't put up some scores early.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you can justify it in your own mind and you're confident that, you know, he's going to continue at a similar level this year, you could start him. I think for me personally, I'm just not too sure exactly what his role is going to be. I'd like to wait and see regarding that. But for me, like, I don't mind the idea of having $1 million guy in there. I mean, don't forget, $1 million guy now is just someone who averaged 97 or above the year before. So it's very different to what it used to be. And, you know, the game is about value. And, you know, in a perfect world, every single player you select goes up in value, goes up in dollars. But you got to balance that too with, if your entire side is basically value, there's going to be an element of risk to every player. So I think starting with a big dog makes sense. But this is the question, and this is why every time I go to lock in my D1 is I keep just kind of scrolling further down, because every one of them is brilliant last year, but I don't know what this year looks like. You know, you got age and, you know, things around Zorko, Whitfield, Nick Martin. You know, is he going to be playing forward? I actually think he scores fine forward, but it's just question marks. Nick Newman, he's no spring chicken either. The one I actually really like, if I was to spend over $1 million, I don't have him at the moment, but I've liked Flanders, because I know his role is likely to change with Dan Roli coming in, but I think Flanders will score just fine as a midfielder as well. So he's probably the pick of those top dogs, but, you know, there's risk with that because I don't think he'll be that commonly owned.
Yeah, and he's got that early buy as well. He's got the round 2 buy, I think it is. So he's got that early one. So maybe that's one where you pick a guy in the 900Ks who doesn't work out and Flanders starts well. You can do a little quick shuffle in round 3 as a potential fix-up. So, very, very interesting with these top-price defenders. In terms of structure, Chris, you were talking a little bit before about how you're currently structured with the sort of one sort of big dog, the three guys around that 800, 750, 850K, and then you got the mid-price and then your rookie. So is that how you've been pretty much settled for most of the preseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the D1 question, obviously, as we're talking now, has been super hard to try and fill because, the worthwhile average versus also the buy as well. Like, you don't want to have that top dogs like Sam Flemmer's 100%. Like, if he wasn't on a buy, I think he would definitely probably be my D1. As soon as he's on that buy, and he's an early buy as well, it just means that you've got to run the gauntlet of playing him 1 week, and then you've lost him, and then you get him back. At this stage, I mean, it's also seeing how many rookies turn up as well. Because at the moment, so I always notice that my original teams are low on rookies. I've got 5 at the moment across the whole starting squad. Sorry, obviously first 22 on field. And so essentially, I look at that and go, it might be light. Do you potentially? Is there another defender that you could put out there? The Saad Al Hawali. I think a lot of people are talking up his score. If he can score 70s, you probably could get away with fielding him and having another premium somewhere else on the line. So essentially, trying to justify those worthwhile averages is going to be really interesting. It's also getting those roles as well. Especially, like we'll probably talk about Port Adelaide, Adelaide as well as a team, and the Saints. I reckon how they're going to line up will be pretty crucial as to how we'll do it. And so, even those community round games they play, the friendlies, hopefully, some teams show their cards about how they're going to line up, and that can help us dictate how we're going to structure.
Yeah, exactly right. But no, Saad El Hawley will definitely be one we'll touch on with Liam as well, being an Essendon fan, and I have learned how to say that properly, Liam, as well. So there you go.
Sayed El Hawali.
Yep. Anyway, moving on from the bad mistake I made in the team reveal video. Liam, how are you structuring up in your defence?
Yeah, my defence is it's identical basically to Chris's. It's a premium. It's 3 guys in and around that 800, 750K mark plus Kadee and Coleman and a rookie. And I admittedly will potentially look to change that. I think, and this can be the crossover. Well, I think there's one player that gives me the most concern for their role, and that's Cal Mills. We don't know a lot. New coach. I think he's in there for legacy reasons and because he is underpriced, but I don't think he's that far underpriced if he's playing as a full-time defender. And someone who is the ultimate team player and has shown himself to be more than willing to just go sit in the back pocket and lock down on someone and not become part of switches and not look to get handball received. So that will probably be the one move that is most likely to change my structure.
Yeah. Him and Perryman have been changing daily for me, or almost hourly. They've been in and out on the 2 because it's good because they're the exact same price, so I can change as much as I want. Doesn't affect any structure. Jordox, what's your current structure looking like in defence at the moment?
Oh, look, I'll be honest. I haven't looked at the side that much. I made sure I sort of tried to switch off from fantasy as much as I could over Christmas and that. So I can tell you what I've got, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what it'll be. In fact, I've got Max Holmes as D1. And I've got a couple of. I've got Short, and then I've got Mills, Coleman, and Roberts as well, and then the Essendon kid. So yeah, they're just names that I like at the moment. So I'm nowhere near my structure at what my structure is going to be. In fact, I've recently put Flynn in at R2, which just changed everything. So my structure's all over the place.
Yeah, cool. So very fluid structure at the moment for Jordox's team sitting there. So I reckon we'll move on to the players that we've got in the notes here in terms of who we're going to go. So what we'll do, we'll go through sort of from Chris, Liam, Jordox, myself. We'll do one each and we'll go around again and do it like that. So Chris, do you want to talk about your first defender premium that you've got for us?
It's funny. It's the first one is the one I actually don't have in my team. I'd have to do a restructure to get him. However, I really like him though, so he probably might end up in my team by the end of the preseason. It's Bailey Dale. So there's obviously the pros and cons of a Bulldogs player. No buy early on, so that's awesome. Means you get them the whole time through. They've had a few players move on that may have cut his grass a little bit around like the Caleb Daniel sort of thing. So last season he's priced at 93. And he got an injured score of 18 in round 5, so you take that out. Obviously with the issues that taking injured scores out does. And that puts him at a 96. So straight away, in theory, 3 points under. He got 11 scores of 100 or more, including 160. And also, I know we're talking AFL Fantasy, but his Supercoach scores are pretty high as well, which I do pay attention to that occasionally because it means that he's getting worthwhile possessions. And it may be the dogs might want the ball in his hands more because he's actually using it well. Obviously, I think if he scores 100, which is what I think he should do, that worthwhile average 93, price at 93, getting 100, I think is what you would actually want. And it would probably make him a top 6 defender as well. So I think the only cons against him really are he's got 2 scores below 50 during the season that weren't the injured score. And he got a 65 in that elimination final against the Hawks. I always look at what they got in finals as well if they played, because obviously there's more on the line. Were they a player they went to or not? So that's not ideal. And obviously the Bevo factor, I mean, he does swing him around the field a little bit. But I feel like Bailey Dale's got enough runs on the board now that he should be that key distributor off the back line. And so I think there's no reason he can't go 100 for the year, which I think should be a top 6 defender then. So no buy early on. I think he's a good pick.
Yeah. Yeah. And shout out to Mitch from the Ball Boys. He was actually the first one that put me onto this as well. And I think probably a couple of people as well, is that I'd sort of had him there on the watch list and didn't really think too much of it, but sort of thinking about it a little bit more, there's not as many of those defenders over 900k they've got meat on the bone, but he potentially could have like 4, 5, 6, 7 points on that. So definitely someone that I'm looking at. He's currently sitting as my D1 at the moment. Whether he stays there or not is going to be something to watch as well. Liam, who have you got for your first defender premium?
I have got Jaiden Short, which should not come as much of a surprise. I don't think. I feel as though given his past scoring history, the sheer volume of points that have left Richmond, and in particular, Daniel Roli leaving, I see him as someone who can comfortably be back in the mid-90s, which, given where he's priced at, is more than enough for me to pick him. I think the one thing that I really do like is I think Dan Rioli may have led or been in the top 3 for handball receives amongst defenders last year. That will have to go to someone. And the other kind of distributors from Richmond are not running handball receive type of players outside of Jaiden Short. So you got Nick Vlauston, what's his name, Brown. They're both more stationary users of the football. Short is the player that I think is most likely to come in and take that market share. And the ball is probably going to live back there. So all in all, I see him as a pretty easy pick for my team and probably the easiest pick in my defence.
Yeah, I think that, well, I know I've got Short. Obviously, Jordox, you got Short, and Liam, and Chris, you've got Short as well sitting there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so he seems like a pretty consensus sort of pick in the preseason as well, and definitely got that upside as well. So, yep. Cool. We'll move on to Jordox, mate. Who's your first defender premium you want to chat about?
Yep, so I've got Max Holmes, which won't be a surprise for anyone who tuned into the coaches panel, Most Relevant 50 today, because I spoke about that with MJ on today's episode. And, it's funny doing those with the coaches panel, because it does force you to look into a player that you hadn't really considered with too much detail. And Holmes, to me, is the perfect answer to what we're talking about. He's not going to be very commonly owned, I wouldn't have thought. But when you look at his breakout last year, he went from, in his fourth year, he went up to an average of 94. And you talk about meat on the bone, trying to find anyone with even a bit of value. I mean, he's 2 kick-ins away from averaging 100 last year. So I look at what's changed for Geelong. Where's he going to play? Because he went into the midfield and his scores did dip slightly. But I wonder how much of that was because of the position versus it was the second half of the year. It was his first, really big year of being a really important player. In fact, he won their best and fairest. So Zach Tui is retired. That'll open up a handful of kick-ins at least if Holmes is in the back line. And with Bailey Smith coming in, he's a pretty similar player to Holmes. So I can see Holmes going back to that half-back role, which is where he was he was a freak in terms of consistency last year. He only went under 20 touches once for the season. And there was that run of games where, he wasn't scoring massive tons by any stretch, but he was just a solid 90 at the very least. So a guy who's built his floor score basically up to an 80, 90, all that's left now for him is the ceiling. He scored a 120. That was his best. And that's all that's left now, is to see him add to his ceiling, which will then naturally add to his average. And yeah, I can see him averaging 100 this year for sure. And what else do I have? Yes, he was 5th in line for kick-ins. So yeah, I wouldn't be banking on the kick-ins being the difference. I just think he'll be entering his 5th year full of confidence and hopefully fully fit, because he's had some really poor timely injuries in his career.
Yeah, I guess the one thing we've probably got to touch on with him is he does have the dreaded round 3 bye, the early bye with a lot of these sort of cheaper players. So I guess, Jordox, if you're looking to start him, is that at the expense of one of these other cheaper defenders? Are you maybe not starting some different line, or what are your thoughts around that? Or could you do maybe what Chris did, start him if he goes well, make a bit of cash and trade him out, see what he does in opening round?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, that particular round of buys is different to last year. So that's where applying my lessons from last year isn't really going to cut it. So I'm going to have a different approach. But look, at this stage, I'll be honest, I'm not obsessing over the buys. They're going to play a really important part in how I finalise my squad. But right now, I'm just looking for players I like, players with value. And, at the end of the day, I'll tally up how many I've got from that round and I'll have to make some cuts. But Holmes, to me, just ticks the boxes. He's not $1 million. He's a couple of kick-ins away from being a 100 guy. And I think he'll find that this year.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think he will take a step forward. And if it wasn't for that only buy, he'd definitely be one that I'd be strongly considering in my defence. My first defender preen that we're going to chat about is Liam Duggan. So Liam Duggan has been a defender preem for us for a couple of years now. I've averaged 83.5 in 2022, but up to 96.3 in 2023, which was a career high for him. Last year was back down to 88.7, but that did have a couple of an injury-affected score, definitely, which was against Brisbane, where he got injured on 23, and that was in the first quarter. That was that Charlie Cameron tackle that was obviously in the news, and whether he should have been suspended or not. He also had a 28 in the final game against Geelong. I can't actually remember much of that game besides Jeremy Cameron going absolutely ballistic. But
it was a Geelong whitewash. Eagles.
It wasn't an injury, was it? It was just a bad score.
I feel like he did have something, but potentially was on track for a rotten score anyway.
I think the ball went in the Eagles' half as well. So
yeah. Just take it out. Take it out of the averages. You can do what you want. It's your
exactly. Well, if you take it out, he's averaging essentially 92 over there. So it's like you're getting a player that's priced under 90 that in the role for the Eagles, he's averaging over 90 for a few years. So he's someone I'm keeping an eye on, a bit like Bailey Dale, could be a few point unders compared to these other guys over 900K where there might not be as much meat on the bone. So someone that I'm keeping on. But I guess for me, I'm looking at the reason I'm keeping an eye on him and he's not in my team currently is I'm looking at seeing what his role is, because is he going to play in defence? Obviously, Liam Baker's there now. Obviously, Witherden's no longer there, but he was sort of in now the team anyway. But that sort of number one distributor role is sort of up for grabs. Is it going to be Baker? Is it going to be Duggan? Is it going to be a mixture of the two? Or does Duggan play midfield? Does he go into that midfield and help out the likes of your Tim Kelly, Harley Reid, Elliot Yeo, guys like that in the midfield? So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on in the preseason.
Jack Graham will be a big part of that too.
Yeah,
if he's
Graham
straight on the side. If he's that hard-edged midfielder, then maybe Duggan does push back again. So where do you prefer it? Because it's similar to Holmes. And, Liam was saying with Sinclair before, where do you prefer these guys who can play both roles? Where would you prefer to see Duggan to get you on board? Backline or on the ball?
For me, it's probably backline, I think. We've seen he's gone to midfield at times, but I haven't seen a stretch at all where he's put up these big scores. He's also, when he's been in the midfield, he's done run with roles at times as well. I've seen him run with a Jordan Dawson when Dawson was going really well in that game, round early last year at Adelaide Oval. I think he went to Dacos for maybe a quarter or so. Didn't really do much because Dacos went absolutely nuts in that game. But he's done that, and I don't like players that do that. We saw Hayden Young struggle with that in the back sort of part of the year when he was running with players, and you don't really see many players have run with roles but also score well. Like Dunkley, to an extent, could be the one guy you say has done it, but even he's had some poor scores with run with roles. So he's not really. I don't know. I definitely prefer defence because I think he'll have a share of the kick-ins. Maybe some +6s back there as well. So that's what I'll be looking for with Liam Duggan. Chris, who's your second defender you want to chat about?
So this one is someone I'm trying to convince myself that I want in my team. So he is currently in my team, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of research on him. But it's also, again, it's waiting for that community round where they actually play out their 22 and see where he sits. So it's Kane Farrell. So price is 79, so just a tick over the 800k of this criteria. He is, in my eyes, an interesting player. I think he's also been mentioned by Mitch as well. I think me and him have had a few in common. So it was 14-point increase between 23 and 24. He had one opportunity to play without Houston in that round 23 against the Dockers. And he was on 51 just before half-time, and then he got injured. So who knows what he would have scored then. And it suddenly showed the opportunity of being able to actually get the ball. He got 4 tons last year and 3 in the 90s as well. So I look at him and see him as someone has to get Houston's numbers. I had Houston last year in my team for 16 rounds, and he was a massive pod for me then. I had him from the start, and it was one of those things where if he went well, I noticed my ranking shot up. If he didn't go quite so well, I noticed that my ranking suffered, and it was because he was someone that no one else really rolled with. So that Port halfback mix, I think, will be fascinating, whether it's a Logan Evans or I think there was a couple of others that have been mentioned. I think that Jace Burgoyne. Yeah, Ryan Burton, definitely. Jace Burgoyne.
Does Sin get a game? Yeah.
Miles Bergman.
Yes.
I got a question for you, Chris. And you may know from your own research, but who took more kick-ins for Port Adelaide last year, Houston or Farrell?
Actually, I don't have the kick-in detail actually. So.
Farrell by a whisper.
Farrell.
And I think it's because Houston missed the last game. But that's an interesting to see that he already has that role. He's already a big part of it. So I think he's going to be the one out of those Port guys.
Jordox, you might be selling me on that one there, mate.
Yeah, good.
I've just got some questions about, he does go missing in a stack of games. I don't know if, he might get the Houston role, but I think that we're probably underselling the extent to which Dan Houston is a former All-Australian and has ridiculous levels of backline of thirst. He worked very hard to stream through contests. Now, Farrell has an elite kick. I don't think anyone's going to question that, but I am hesitant to be too confident in that scoring becoming Farrell straight away. I also just have a lot of questions about Port Adelaide in general. because I do wonder if Ken, in an effort to save his job, attempts to a pivot in some of his strategies. The Port Adelaide game style is unique in that, they rely on long kicks more than literally any other team. Their average meters per disposal, I think, is like a meter longer. And I think they've been in the top 3 for the last 4 out of 5 seasons. They're extremely high. And they can never convert it to success. They often struggle in the finals when games are more contested and it's harder to hit targets. I do have to wonder if that's something that does change. So I, like everyone else, saw Houston going out and went, oh, well, that's good for Kane Farrell. But with the volume of options that they have, plus just generally, I think that in an effort to save his job, Ken Hinkley's going to have to do something different. The issue with him is, you make finals every fucking season and then you never go anywhere. Something's got to give.
Yeah, take that over no finals, just quietly. But carry on.
No, Jordox, I'm on that train with you, mate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess when you obviously lean with that is I'm sort of keen to see, because if Port do change it a bit, I see if they're not kicking long, they might be trying to hit up shorter targets, and Farrell might get involved in that. But I guess that's the whole point of, we want to see what Port are doing. There's not a big enough sample size to see Port without Houston and Farrell being that number 1 user. We've only got, as Chris was saying, only a couple of quarters. So he's currently sitting in my team, and definitely someone that I'll be keeping a close eye on in those match sim and preseason games, because I think he could be someone to look at, but he could also be a guy that doesn't quite get it done for us as well. But we'll have to see in the preseason. But Liam, we'll head over to your second defender preem as well.
Yeah, this was the player this was a slot I had the most trouble picking, because I just don't know how much I love most of the premiums, and so I knew that I was going to find a way to talk about Jack Sinclair at the beginning, so I didn't pick him for this. I've gone with Nick Martin because, people rightfully question role shift and whatever, but his average when he's playing more up the ground, and you use generally his heat map, but also his CBAs or lack of kick-ins as a way to kind of identify roughly where he's playing. He still averages 105 or 104.8, I think is what it was, in games out of halfback. That's still a really solid score in a line where we're going to struggle. We know that he has elite potential, even if he's not playing in defense. But I think the important thing to note is that in the back end of the season, he was still starting at half forward, starting on a wing, getting a handful of CBAs here and there, and then also still drifting into halfback. So I think that we might be underselling the extent to which he's probably going to be at or around what he's priced at. And he has an incredible, he has a really good ability to hit 120, 120, 120 week after week after week. And the other thing that amazed me is he has the highest minimum score of any defender this year. So his lowest score was 79. The next highest is Flanders with 73, and then Sheasel and Holmes both had a 71. So extremely consistent scoring, irrespective of role. Has a great ceiling capability, consistently hits 120 plus scores regardless of where he plays, and even in bad games he can kick goals to boost his score. That's all a fairly decent recipe for someone that you could pick as your D1. I'm neglecting to mention the fact that he is apparently training more in the midfield this preseason, and I think it's because it rightly identifies as, after Zach Merritt, he is the Bombers' most important ball user. And I wouldn't hate the idea of him having access to more tackles, because I also trust him to play at any position in the ground, find free space, hit up targets inside 50, get cheap ball when necessary, run up and down a wing for days. He's an elite endurance runner. I think that there's a 110 player potentially sitting there.
Yeah.
And I think that the risk is relatively low.
I think I agree with that, because I see him in the mold of an Errol Goulden type player. Obviously, Goulden is a better, I think, user by foot, but I think they both got that running capability, and they can both lay a few tackles and get into open space. So I don't mind that take, obviously, and being a Bombers fan, but obviously they've got that round 4 bye, which is a bit better than that round. Exactly.
It's not that round 3 because it's with Hawthorn. And we're not picking many Hawthorn players at the moment.
Yeah. Is Nick Martin someone that you're actually considering potentially starting with at that D1 spot?
Yes, he's not in there at the moment, but I've also taken up a strategy this preseason. In my on the official platform, my team is half filled. It's mainly there to just make sure that I've got the players that I'm confident in, and so that I don't become overly attached to speculative options that I put in there to make a structure work. What I have done is over on the Bolter team picker, I've tinkered a little bit more, but I don't go and look at that nearly as often. I'm not super attached to that structure. It's more I just fiddle around to see what kind of structures can work. So at the moment, my D1 is empty on the official platform, but I'm considering Martin. I'm considering Sinclair, and I also think that for particularly players with that round 4 bye, I actually think it's helpful. We might get a sense of how the Bombers are going to play. We might see if the addition of different players across halfback, across the wing, across half forward impact Nick Martin. We kind of see we'll probably get at least 2 proper enough games of footage, and then also a preseason trial match of him playing potentially more as a midfielder. I don't think that it's not something that I mind per se, particularly because we get best 18, and if I'm fielding an extra rookie this week, I actually don't mind the crop of defensive rookies that we've got this year. So I'm not too put out by that.
Yeah, it's a really good
very, very good point.
Last season, we had rookies that were putting up 70s and 80s and kind of thing, which you could actually really serviceably keep. So you could actually ride a premium through a bye and be able to roll it through. So yeah, if you are confident on that round, although unfortunately the Sard is going to be on the same bye as Nick Martin.
Yeah, exactly. Which is unfortunate, but I still think if you've only got 21 players in a given week, so long as you're not rolling with, I'd say, 6 rookies in your first time structure, I think you're okay.
Just a quick thought on Martin. I love it, Liam. I like it because as a community, we kind of all get scared away when a player moves to half forward or doesn't have what we perceive as the plum role of halfback. But that's the thing with Nick Martin. If he goes forward, the guy kicks goals. I mean, this is a guy who kicked 5 on debut. If you can cast your minds back to that game few years ago when they got smashed and he kicked 5, that was so random.
Yep.
But if you look at his numbers, he's kicked 4 goals in a game, 3 goals in a game. Anyone that can do that, that's where you get some serious ceiling. So I don't mind the pick. I think you got to start with someone. So why not have a crack at him?
Yeah,
I find Nick Martin fascinating. I remember when he came through in that first year, his junior numbers, he'd never got more than 22 disposals, and he'd barely done anything. And he was this completely speculative last minute pickup by the Bombers. And yet now he's absolutely dominating. He's kicking goals. He's getting the ball everywhere, and the Bombers want it in his hands. Eagles and Dockers should be kicking themselves. There was a West Australian that was just available, but obviously the stats didn't tell it. But maybe the actual player is a different player.
And one final thing: the most insane thing about Nick Martin is it's not like there weren't going to be scouts watching him, because his teammates with what's his name at Port Adelaide, the forward. I can't remember. I've forgotten the name of him now. But basically,
Georgiades?
Mitch Georgiades was in his high school team. They played, or they were playing in the same junior club. So there were going to be scouts watching Nick Martin play. And it's just, again, there's a whole other rant to be had about the fact that Adrian Dodora was only good at taking players in the rookie draft and in the in those kind of preseason acquisitions, because it meant that he threw away all of the other rules that he used when drafting and doing free agents, which ended up with super mid picks all the time. But I won't give that 10-minute rant now.
No.
Exactly. Beautiful. Jordox, we'll move on to your final premium defender pick.
Well, a bit like Holmes, I picked a guy that I hadn't really had on my radar and thought, if I really look into this guy, it might sell me. It actually didn't, but let's go through them anyway. So, no, I had a good look at Dan Roli. So he's priced, in the early 80s. So he's at 857K.
I'm getting the sense you're picking all early buy players. You just said last year you weren't picking none, so you're just going to pick all a team full of early buy players.
Not picking him. I'm just discussing the details of him. So back-to-back years averaging early 80s since his role change a few years ago. Has now scored an 80-odd in that role under Dimmer and under this always happens to me with the new coaches. The Richmond coach last year. Someone?
Adam Uze,
of course. So my point is he's done it under two different coaches, and now he's going back to the original coach that he played under in Hardwick. So last year, I liked looking at kick-ins. He was third in line for the kick-ins at Richmond behind Short and Foston. So he's obviously involved in that. And I think that is likely to increase, and he could be the main one at Gold Coast, because the top three at Gold Coast for kick-ins were Powell, Flanders, Sexton. Now, Powell, I can see continuing. Obviously, touch wood, he gets a good run with his body. Flanders, I do think, is moving more up the field, and Sexton, I'd be pretty surprised if we see much of him this year. So I think there's some points to be gained there. And the other thing too with Roli is how he finished 2024 with some really big scores. So across his career, he's only ever had 30 touches 4 times, and 2 of those times were in the last 3 weeks of last season. So he certainly finished like a house on fire. And I do remember there was one game, I reckon he was pushing 80, 90 at halftime. He was like pushing the halftime ton.
I'm pretty sure that was against Gold Coast. I think it was
that last game went big. So, anyone with that ability always piques my interest. The other thing too, with that run home, so pre-buy, he averaged 79. Post-buy, he averaged 94. But he does have the early buy, as Bales has mentioned. He's probably going to say that. In fact, I think all 4 players I'm talking about tonight have the early buy. Anyway,
they do.
I'm not saying don't get him. He's probably not for me. I can see him improving. I can see him being value. But at this stage, he's probably not the one for me.
For me, he's the perfect guy that you don't start with. He's got the round 2 bye. You get 2 games of data, opening round and round 1. If he looks the goods, you bring him in round 3. If one of those other defenders, if you start a Mills, Perryman, Roberts, either or the Roberts, whoever, like you start them. And particularly those round 3 guys have all got that bye. Maybe if you start even an extra one, maybe your plan is to, bit like Chris, like what you did, he jumped off of Tom Green in round 3. Maybe you plan on doing that this year, potentially in the back line, and you say, okay, I'm going to start an extra guy in defence. So let's say you start Roberts, Mills, and Perryman, for example, or even if you even if you just do Coleman, Mills, and Perryman, just start the 3. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to jump off on those guys, jump on Dan Roli if he's looking the goods after round 3. So I don't mind the pick. Someone definitely to be keeping an eye on. My final defender premium pick is only going into his 2nd year, but he looked pretty good in his 1st year. And that's Colby McKercher. And I'm going to start off by saying this is heavily dependent on role. This comes down to what happens in preseason. If he's half back, I think there's a good chance that myself and a lot of the community will pick him because we know what he can do. If he's in the midfield or even on a wing, I'm not as keen. Even if he plays forward, I'm not as keen. But just some numbers in terms of to pique people's interest. So he played 7 games post the bye last year. Post coming back from injury. Played a couple of games in the VFL, came back in, played 7 games. Average of 93.3 with a high score of 123, which was against Gold Coast in round 17. Also scored another ton in round 22, a 111 against West Coast. The other thing that piques my interest as well is that if you look at all the games that he had from last year, he only had 3, I'm counting here, only 3 games where he scored below 70. And that's in his 1st year as well. We were talking before about how Nick Martin, his lowest score for the year was a 79, and he was sort of the best of those defenders. But McKercher in his 1st year, like the 3 games where he scored under 70 was an injured 2, which is no surprise, a 50 against Brisbane at Gatherround when he played a fair bit of midfield, which that was the only game where he played. Actually, he only had 2 games where he played midfield. And fun enough, 3 games where he played midfield were all his 3 lowest scores. So when he's playing half back, he's scoring over 70, and we know that he's got that big ceiling. Just depends with Caleb Daniel coming in. Is Zach Fisher back there? Sort of what's happening with him? Like, there's a few other guys back there. Like Sheasel should play in that midfield forward, but who knows? Does he go into defence? I'd heard Dylan Alexander on the coaches panel obviously chatting about, do they put Finn O'Sullivan back there at half back? They've done it with McKercher and Sheasel. They do it with Finn O'Sullivan as well. So a few interesting pieces to watch in pre-season. Like Josh Goda, my North Melbourne mate, is a fan of. Does he come back into the team after a serious injury? So a few things to watch, but someone that I'll be keeping a close eye on. I think a lot of us will be keeping a close eye on him as well. I think we'll move over to the defender mid prices now, and we've touched on them a couple of times already, Chris, but your first defender mid pricer, and all these players are under 800k as well for people listening as well. So Chris, who's your first player you want to chat about?
So Callum Mills. I've actually wrote my deck of cards for DT talk about him as well. I have a connection with him in that he probably cost me a hat in 2023 when I brought him in for a 3 when I was sitting about 28th overall, about round 9. So I definitely have seen the bad side of him, but I also would have had him in 21 and 22 when he was scoring 110 for an average for an entire season. So coming in this year, he is priced at, what is he, mid-70s, I think. So he's cheap as chips being in that position. I think he is the biggest round 0 watch. If he scores, let's say 95 to 100, and he is in the guts, I feel like you can't ignore him. You have to get him in your team. I mean, talking about floor scores, so 2021, his floor score was 85. In 2022, he had 8 scores over 120 as well. So he's got this fantasy pedigree. He is the man. However, if you take out 21 and 22, he's averaged 74 across the rest of his career. He only had 3 years where he's played all the home and away games as well. So he's coming off injuries. He's coming off all those kind of issues. He's no longer the captain, is he now? Or is he still captain? Is he
co-captain? I'm pretty sure Dane Rampy, I think.
So there's a lot of things going in and out for him. He didn't play, obviously, the grand final last year. So straight away, Dean Cox takes over. He could be a point of difference that he's able to bring in. I looked back as well at the 2022 grand final that the Swans lost as well. And I looked at the heat map, and he was in the back line for the whole game. So again, in the 2 games on the big stage, they've been humbled. He was not in the middle of the field. So there's no reason that you'd want him in there, because you look at the players they've currently got in there. They're cycling Heaney, Goulden, and all those guys. But then you go, well, Parker's moved on. Like, he didn't play as many games last season, but he still, when he played, he would play that midfield half forward role. So Mills potentially could be the person that fills that gap, and actually is the experience they need to help them with all those young players actually take it to the next step. So I think he's a massive round 0 watch. If he's playing in the back line, and as you said in the intro at the beginning, him playing as the Mr. Fix-It kind of role and being able to be thrown around the ground and the team player, he's not probably going to be going for those cheap marks and cheap kicks that other players might, because he wants to set the example. However, like, if they are going to him, like, he's a massive player that, again, he has that difficult round 3 bye. So another one where, that's why I think, for me, I think 90 would be what you'd hope for from a player of his price. However, I think having that round 0 bye, I think you're going to need that 100 to see what he gets to be able to start with him. And he could be that player again. So say he goes 100 for the first 2 or 3 rounds before he goes on that bye. At his price, you could turn him around and flick him on as well on his bye in a bit of a Tom Greenstall role that I did last time. Because you're going to make plenty of cash off that start. and jump on a defender that's actually in a solid role but overpriced.
The thing I like about Mills as well is that even if he doesn't work out, there are options around him that have that opening round buy as well, that if they score well, it's an easy pivot if it's not the role you want. So I feel like that almost means that we almost want more from Mills if he's playing the role, and then these other guys are playing well, which I know that I think all three, actually full four of them we're going to be chatting about as well. So Mills is definitely a pre-season watch. Liam, your first mid-pricer, and one of them has got that round 3 buy as well.
Yeah, I've just gone a little bit different with this one, and it's Lawson Humphreys. You were talking earlier about Max Holmes' position in defence, and I was also just having a look at the new fantasy big board from DFS Australia, which is a great tool. Max Holmes, I think, ranked about 8th overall for defenders in the first half of the season, dropped away in the second season. I then went and looked at the with-without stats. He scores about 10, 11 points less with Lawson Humphreys inside. And I wanted us to talk about him because he came on, made a noticeable impact as a classic Geelong pick, a 22-year-old who 2 years prior had been playing bloody reserve waffle, and comes in and looks great. He's got a beautiful kick on him, and their defense looked markedly easier, and his rise basically allowed what's his name, Tom Stewart, to be able to play a more prominent midfield role. I personally just think that, this is a pick that I'm not confident in. If he was in my side, I'm sitting here because I know that it's betting on natural progression per se, and like his floor scores were really not that great and would definitely be frightening. But I just think that he looked incredible. He's got a beautiful kick on him. He even made it up high enough up the ground and kicked a goal on debut. I just really find him like a fascinating prospect for this year, and just think that the way he plays is someone that I think, in the short to medium term is an 85 plus averaging midfielder, defender.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned how good of a kick he is. He's a very good kick on both feet as well. That's one other thing I noticed. So yeah, he's definitely someone that I had a couple of times looped on the bench. I think I looped him on for a ton late in the year. So a bit of a soft spot for Lawson there. So definitely one I'll be watching in the preseason and seeing how that affects him. Even Tom Stewart and Max Holmes is one, seeing how that all works back there. Jordox, your first mid-pricer pick. Which Robert are you going for?
Well, just quickly, I love the Humphreys one, and just touching on Mills, I'm actually really surprised there's so much hesitation from the community around Mills. I think it's one that I don't even think we need to overthink it. I'm completely locked into him, except for the fact that I'm also locked into this guy who's his teammate, and that's Matt Roberts. So don't go on about the buys, Bales. I know about the buys. So average priced at $780K. 2024 average was 76, but an 85 in non-sub games, which, we can use the stats all we want, but there were enough sub games to drastically impact his average. So I think it's relevant. So you're getting him on the cheap to start with by about 9 points. What a season. What an effort from him. And it's crazy to think he's played 30 games of footy, AFL. So I wanted to look at his career average and see how much the sub had affected him. So in his 30 career games, he's averaging 64, which isn't terrible for a guy who's played 30 games. But 22 of those career games were with above 50% time on ground. So 7 subs and 1 just randomly in his debut. He had 49, I think.
He got injured.
Anyway,
I remember he got injured as well against Geelong. As well.
There you go. That may have been it. So anyway, he's averaging 80 from 22 full games across his career, which does go back to 2022. So he'll be 2, 3, 4. This will be his 4th year on the list, I believe. Incredible. I mean, you're only scratching the surface of what this guy's going to do. The only concern, or some of the concerns I have around him, except for the buy and the fact that I really want Mills, is his best part of the year did coincide with when Justin McInerney was out injured. So doing your classic without. With McInerney, now this does include a lot of sub games, 64. So take that a little bit with a grain of salt. I think what's more important is the without McInerney, and it was 107. He went on a 6-week run at the back end of last year. So, I think with McInerney, they may have needed to fill that spot. So I think that's when maybe Lloyd went up the ground, that opened up for Roberts. I'm not too fussed about all of that. I mean, it's a concern, but I'm not worried about Lloyd kicking him out. I think they've found a kid here who is going to be their distributor for the next however long. So I'm really bullish on him. Kick-ins, I love to look at. Second in line behind Blakey. I don't see that really changing. And I think his value, and in a line where we're not sold on the top dogs, I think he's a pretty smart pick. Just wish him and Mills played for different sides.
Be good if Roberts was playing for the Crows. It'd be good. But yeah, no, Roberts had the second most kick-ins, and that was including all the sub games and everything like that. So he's someone that I think definitely we've got to be keeping an eye on. And as I was saying with Chris with Mills, is if Mills is playing defence and Roberts is playing defence, but is good scoring, you just pivot to Roberts in that thing. Chris, were you gonna say something as well?
The only thing I did look at the last 6 games there where he'd scored so many, but then, as I said about the final, so he went 57, 71, and 73. So that's the only thing I would put against, because I hadn't thought about Roberts all preseason. And then when you sent me the Google Doc and you said about Matt Roberts, and I was like, oh, I'll have a look at him. And I saw those final 6 games, and I was like, geez, that's almost is a winning pick there. But then those 3 finals games, I don't know how the game changed in that to how he's
with finals, you've almost got to put a, 10-15% price scoring discount, because finals become so much more contested. There's so much less fluff out the back. But I do take your point. And I did notice that, and I made a point of not including them in any of my averages.
Yeah, when they help out to the story, definitely include them.
Yeah,
exactly.
And because he's a young player as well, I guess maybe the finals as well can sometimes almost get the better in terms of maybe they don't have as much impact as well. Maybe they go more to a Blakey as well. So yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on in the preseason. My first, we're continuing the early season buys, which looking at all the mid prices, there is only one that has been picked, and that is by Liam, who doesn't have an early buy. So all these guys have got early buy, which is what we were saying before about all these guys we're looking at have got the early buy. But I'm talking about Harry Perryman. As I said before, he's the exact same price as Callum Mills. So I've been chopping and changing between the two a lot. But I'm interested in Perryman because it's obviously a new team, which we do see a lot of these guys that are the winning picks and knockout picks are the guys that change teams or are injury affected. And obviously he's moved to a different club. He's averaged over, I believe 85. I think, George, you were saying with MJ on the coach panel in the 50 most relevant episode a couple of times there. So we know he can average in the mid-80s. Can he go higher at Collingwood? And I guess, obviously, the thing I'm looking out for is Collingwood haven't necessarily been a high-scoring fantasy team compared to the Giants. So that's sort of the knock on it. However, the counterpoint to that is at the Giants, he wasn't up the pecking order, even in the midfield. You still had your Tom Greens, you still had your Josh Kellys, your Stephen Cornelios, guys like that were ahead of him. Whereas he's going to Collingwood, Dacost's ahead of him. Argument that DeGoey could be ahead of him, but he could also be a guy that goes forward a bit more with Perryman in there. And
DeGoey is comfortably ahead of him.
Yeah, so those two are ahead of him. I still think that there's not as many guys in front of Perryman going to Collingwood. I think he's gone to Collingwood because he's playing midfield. I don't think he would have gone to Collingwood just to be another guy to fill a role. So the question is, has he got the upside? And that's the thing I'm going to be looking out for in opening round is that can he hit those tons? Can he get those scores and get that cash gen started early? Because I think we've seen Matt Roberts can score these tons. Callum Mills can score tons. A few of the other guys we'll chat about, we've seen it before. Whereas Perryman, we haven't seen it probably for as long, even though we have seen a couple of scenes where he's done solid. So I'm still probably sliding with Mills just at the moment, but someone that I'm keeping on as well. So someone, I'm keeping on. Cool. We'll move over to Chris's second pie and another guy with an early season buy. And I haven't actually heard this guy spoken about, so I'm interested to see what you've got to say about him, Chris.
I thought it'd be good to try and put someone that hasn't been talked about much. And he's probably going to potentially benefit from Harry Perryman moving to Collingwood. Lockie Ash. So he's a player who, I mean, the Giants picked him with pick 4 in 2019. So if they rate him highly, they should probably be playing him in his best position and giving him a real good crack at it. He had an injured 18 last season, so you take that out, as we do. And then, so he's actually averaged 81. So he's 4 points under straight away. He ended the season on a 3-game average of 86. And he had a career high season in 2023 where he averaged 84. So the way I look at it is that I reckon he's possibly 5 or 10 points at least unders of what he can do. And I feel like the Giants are another watch where they could actually change up how they operate. There might be a different move. They might actually have to move towards that, I guess, different role. I mean, trying to avoid the finals again, he got a 64 and a 61, so I won't add that to my argument of him being good. But I think he could be that. I mean, looking at his scores, he gets a lot of 70s and 80s and all that kind of thing, but he has got those 90s creeping through, and so you wonder if a slight change of structure, maybe with the Harry Perryman moving on, does he get that access to a bit more ball? So I thought I'd just raise him as a player that people might want to look at and do a bit of research on. Unfortunately, yes, he does have the bye, which obviously does not help any of this scenario.
Yeah. The good thing is he doesn't have the round 3 bye. He's got the round 2.
He doesn't.
Could be someone as an alternative if you're wanting some of the cash in. If he goes one opening round, a lot more people, I think, will be jumping on board. Liam.
102 last round 0, just for argument's sake as well.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Liam, so we're going to be chatting about your second mid-pricer, and we have someone that doesn't have the early buy, but he's also the cheapest out of the lot as well. So who is your second mid-pricer?
Yeah, so I have gone with Ari Schoenmaker. And this is a fairly simple proposition, I would say. They've lost Josh Battle from that defence, and Roli Bonner has also been unceremoniously booted. He has great scoring, has some great scoring potential from his junior years, and he scored super solidly as well in the VFL. I think that he is likely to come in and be a player that gets a role at a team that loves to score points in transition. Like I'd say it's a pretty simple value prop. Like Josh Battle in particular averaged, and this is again going off the DFS score sources, and I know that Jaiden has his stuff as well on that front, but it's what I've got available to me now. There's 57 average points for transition on turnover, and 10 from kick-ins, and then Roli Bonner was 53 and 17. There's a stack of points for transition players available at the moment, and given how unpricey Ari is, the fact that he's at 494k means that I think you can make a pretty comfortable argument that you've got a 75 averaging player here, and given he's priced at 46, 47, something around that mark, it's more than enough value and great coverage because there's no early round buy.
Exactly.
He's got the good mid-season buy too. See, Bales, yeah. I've been reading up on the buys.
There you go. But the good thing with Ari Schoenmaker as well is, even if he did what he just did in the games where he played last year, he averaged a tick under 59. I think it's 58.8. So you've automatically got like over 10 points of upside there. And then there's the improvement for even more. And obviously, as you mentioned, all the points that are freed up for St Kilda. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And he's also another good one. We'll talk about Kadeem Coleman as well at point, but obviously hearing chatter that there's like people thinking, is he going to be ready for opening round? And we haven't heard anything to contradict that he will be ready. But if something were to happen, there's a potential alternative there that's a little bit cheaper. So there's a bit of a pivot point there. But also, if you want to go one of those mid prices down and start an Ari Shellmaker as well as Kaneen Coleman, I think there potentially could be that as well.
I love it. And I love the pick, the idea, Liam. And I'll ask you this, fellas. How often do you reckon in the history of the game has a player debuted and been given the responsibility of taking kick-ins? Because that's what happened with young Ari last year. So they obviously like the ball in his hands and they trust him. And he took kick-ins in all 4 games that he played. So that could be a really shrewd one from you, Liam. And, yeah, no buy. So I don't know why we're obsessed with the buy, guys.
My only thing would be looking on the AFL website for the best 22. It does have him among the emergencies.
Yeah, so
and that's the one thing I didn't mention. He played 4 games.
Yeah, but that's that sort of pick. It goes without saying that's prefaced by a solid preseason, and we're hearing word out of the club that he's in round 1. So, because the worst thing you can do is start a guy at that price, and then he's dropped the next week. So.
It's one that I definitely caveat and say I think that if I was going to pick him, you watch all of the preseason footage, but you do not look at his scoring. You look at how he's playing. And I think that's probably true of literally everyone that you might have a question about. I actually think it's more beneficial to do what a lot of people do and put your phone away. Don't look at the live scores as you're watching these games and try and get a sense of, okay, where is he on the field? How often is his man the one getting the ball? How often is he involved in chains? Like trying to follow them on the field, particularly for these younger players. I think that's going to be vital for Shellmaker. Like we know that he's got an elite kick. They can kick it a bloody mile, but he is also going to be probably tasked with playing a taller defensive role. If he gets a ton of ball, but then his opponent is scoring all the time, then I think you're likely to see him get dropped or maybe not start in round 1. So he's going to be an active watch for me for how he plays and how confident I feel in him being someone that will get picked week to week.
Yeah.
And likewise, sorry, go on, Buzz.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the other thing as well is that Sinclair is very, very likely to be playing at halfback. But if there was a world where he did play more in the midfield to start the season, potentially that could open up even more opportunity for.
From a kick-in perspective, Bonner's gone, Battle's gone. So, and they gave it to him in his debut. Speaking of young guys who only played 4 games last year, that actually worked quite perfectly. My last player is Archie Roberts from Essendon. And I had to do a bit of research on him because all I remember about him was at the end of last year thinking, who's got that? Who's got the footy? Who's that? Why do I keep seeing him? Why does he look so good? I think the Bombers have got a ripper there. And maybe I'm getting a little excited because of his fantasy numbers. They can seduce me at the best of times. But I did a bit of research. He was originally tipped to be at like a top 10 pick, but ended up going later in the draft. Not sure why. The thing I like about him is his price. So he's priced at 70. So he's 715K, but he actually averaged 85. So you're actually saving, what was it, about nearly 150K on what he would have been priced at if he was priced at his average. Obviously, he only played 4 games, so that's why he gets a discount. But that appealed to me because I thought even if he just does what he did and goes close to 80, even if he goes backwards, he'll still make money. So, and then the other bits I looked at was when he came in and why. So he came into the squad when Jordan Ridley went down, which unfortunately just keeps happening with Riddles. So fingers crossed for a better year for him. I may have him in my keeper league. But it was also when Dyson Heppel was dropped. So Ridley went out with injury. Heppel was dropped. Roberts came in, averaged 85 in 4 games, including a couple of high 90s, I think. So, I don't know. Liam, you're going to know a lot more about the guy than me, being a Bombers man, but I just, like the Lawson Humphreys call, I remember watching at points last year and just thinking, how's this guy so good already? I didn't even know who he was a week ago.
Yeah, he's pretty excellent. Kind of in the bits that we saw, I think that he had an awesome game against Sydney when we were kind of still hanging around until late in the game. I think the big question though is if he's going to play, and then the second question is, where will he play? Because he's probably a more natural, or they were playing him on the wing in the VFL for most of last year. He definitely played as a halfback as a junior, and from the limited preseason reports that I've seen so far, it does sound like he's competing on the wing. I do just have so many questions about how the Bombers are going to structure up in the kind of halfback and wing areas. There's a good 10 minutes of the episode that I did for Coaches Panel on Siren Hawley, trying to run through all of the options that are there to fill the departures of Kelly and Heppel. I just think I just don't feel very confident in saying, 100% he'll line up round one. He does definitely have some great scoring, but I also, and I can't confirm this explicitly, but I have a memory that the Bombers were scoring so many points across halfback in those final few rounds, and he's got a 99 and a 95 in rounds 23 and 24. So like that may have boosted his numbers to some degree, but also I think he looked great in his first game when we won in the dying seconds against Fremantle. Sorry, I don't feel bad, Chris. I was watching that with Mini Monk. It was delightful.
Nice.
Oh,
and
that was awful.
He took one
Delightful.
kick in. So just adding that because I've been obsessed with kick-ins on this pod.
That's really interesting.
You've clearly got the numbers up.
Yeah.
I think Archie Roberts is. I agree with all of the way the AFL Fantasy does the scoring. The pricing for players. But Archie Roberts is clearly the most stitched up with it. I think so. He was worth like $400K last year, playing 4 games, and now he comes in priced at it's a real unfortunate quirk of the game where how he's been priced. Because if he was mid, say 600, something like that, I reckon you could probably make a case to go for him. But I feel like
it's too expensive.
It's that speculative pick of a player who's only played 4 games. Is he going to be best 22 when you're paying $715K for him? If he was 500 or so, maybe like around the Kadeem Coleman sort of thing, you could go, well, he's got a decent buy because he's got the back end of the early buy, so you can have a few weeks and look at him. And if he scores well, he's going to make you a ton of cash. If he's going at 99, it'd be an absolute dream.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's the guy that if he does go 110, 120 though in opening round, I think we're still even at the price and be expensive. Definitely something we can jump on because he's got that round 4 buy, so you can ride him until the last early season buy and maybe even move him on. But someone definitely to note. The final player that we're going to chat about here, the mid prices. I probably don't need to go too much in depth. We mentioned a couple of times already. Kadeem Coleman was my other one there. It's priced at $521K. He's 30% cheaper than what he was last year, and a lot of us were keen on starting him as well. And we all go back on to how he was scoring in the grand final against Collingwood a couple of seasons ago as well. Had 100 at halftime and ended up with like 120 odd. So just someone that if he's looking good in the preseason and playing in those preseason games, that's another good thing as well, is that I think if he doesn't play these preseason games, it makes it trickier to start him. He's better than Zach Williams and he's better than a Wayne Miller. I think it's the fact that I think the community's been burnt by those players twice and they haven't played these preseason games, that if we start him and he does a Zach Williams from last year and just sort of peters out, he's got the same obviously buys a lot of these other options. There is a way where we don't start with him, but I think a lot of people got him in now. Definitely a big preseason watch, and if he plays those preseason games, I think that'll be a lot of ticks for us and stocks up 100% for Kadeem Coleman. So someone to note. A couple of rookies here I've just listed down as well. Again, rookies, it's very speculative to be saying now, but these are the options I think that we're looking at. So obviously Toby Travalia and Bo Allen are the 2 more expensive rookies a lot of people have got on their fields at D6. I've seen a couple of people put them at D5 and D6. They've gone a bit cheaper, but they're the 2 there. Saad El Hawley as well, obviously a very popular 200K defender. Sorry, thinking 200K. 230K, sorry, at the 30K there. Zach Reed as well, and Josh Gibcus, another couple of 230K rookies as well to be keep an eye on, along with Caleb Smith as well at Richmond. And then a few people have been asking about Jed Buslinger as well at the Dogs. there's a few changes there. Does he come into the team? Again, probably more speculative there. But those are the guys at the moment in terms of rookies that we are looking at. Probably can't go a huge amount too much further. If you want to hear more about Sardell Hawley in depth, then make sure you go check out the coaches panel with MJ and Liam jumping on for that as well. The only three players I think we'll just quickly mention in passing that people have asked, because we've covered a lot of people that are in the live chat, and this has been a long episode, so we'll wrap up now. Luke Ryan was one that JR asked about the first few decent fixtures. Obviously, Chris being the Freo man. Is he just a bit too expensive to start with and a bit too up and down, or what are your thoughts with Luke Ryan?
It's a fascinating one, because if he gets the role where we chip mark, then he's an absolute bargain. He doesn't have the early buy, Jordox, so he's an option there. It's hard to know how Freo are going to go this year. I feel like Jordan Clark's someone who got the run and dash, give him the ball, he'll kick it 60 meters. I feel like they've shown that the chip mark doesn't work, or at least they can't win enough games to make finals. Whereas when they play the run and dash, they can break teams open. They've got a lot of quick players. So I feel like as well, the risk with Luke Ryan as well is that he can play that lockdown defender. He can play that probably second or third tall as well. So I think he's slightly overpriced at this stage. However, if Lomio does go to the holding game, then he is. I mean, we've seen what he put out last year during that period before the buys. He was an absolute lock. So it's a real challenge with him. I wouldn't risk it on him. However, I jumped into him last year in the buys and it ended up being a terrible move. But at the same time, I would happily go again to him because he has such a good fantasy game in him. And he's averaged 101 basically over the last 2 years as well. So when you get to that sort of range, like we said before about the worthwhile average, he can be a player that if he goes 105 on 100 average price, he's actually probably close to being a decent pick. And with no early buy, if you've got no one else you like, especially with the Sinclairs and those kind of guys, he could be that safer pick.
Yeah. Couple of Hawthorn guys a few people have asked about. Jordox is James Sicily and Carl Amon. I think Sicily we've mentioned a few times in pre-season with Battle and Brass being there, but obviously on the other end, a few forwards, potentially injury clouds over than the start of the season. Is Sicily or even Carl Amon either two guys you're considering?
No, Sicily would be the one, but I have not concerns, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him playing forward at stages this year. They've got my memory's no good. They've got Mitch Lewis, I think, is injured. Cashier had a setback earlier in the preseason. I'd just be nervous of that. And that's not like, I'll jump off. Nah, dude can drop a 30 on your head. I'm not interested. Amon, I don't. What did he go? 87 last year. Yeah, I don't know. Hawthorn's a bit of a wait and see because Battle's going in, and Hawthorn just as a whole. I mean, what a year they had. Will that be a unicorn year, or will they go on and finish top 4 and make a prelim? So, yeah, not too sure about the Hawks at the moment.
And they weren't a high-scoring team last year either.
Sorry, Bales. I started last year with Carl Amon. Had him for 3 rounds, traded him out, and he put 113 on me the week I traded him out. After an 80, an 81, and a 74. So there's no reason that he can't get that half back and get a bit of the swing, but especially the amount of defenders they brought in. I agree, Jordox, 100%. I feel like Sicily is a forward. Look, he's going to be a forward this year because they look at that back line and they see they've got those new guys coming in, Barras, Battle. They're not going to want Sicily there as well. I feel like he's going to be the one that gets pushed forward.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Final player as well from Henry Bairstow. Liam, was thoughts on Dan Houston being at Collingwood. The one thing, and Liam, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on as well, is obviously he's got opening round. He's not playing in opening round. He still has a game to serve from the suspension for that hit on Isaac Rankin. So that's just something to note for a lot of people. We don't actually get to see him before. So would that sort of already turn you off a bit, Liam, not being able to see a guy at a new club and seeing exactly sort of what role and I guess market share and that he's going to have?
Yeah, it certainly pushes him a fair way down the pecking order. And I think we did talk a little bit earlier, Bales, you were talking about Collingwood. I think the problem he's going to run into is that all roads with the ball go via Dacos at Collingwood, and it's very hard to have consistently scoring players otherwise because a lot of roles do shift around and Dacos is the singular consistent, and scoring off halfback has not exactly been easy for anyone. And, I think we are aware of the highs and lows of Dan Houston. Chris, you said you owned him for 16 rounds last year. I also brought him in for round 6 or 7, and he scored like 140 for me on debut in the squad and then sucked like every second week from that point onwards. I think he does have an element of inconsistency to his game that if you don't get the benefits of opening rounds to bump up his price, it does certainly fright me off him. I would not be shocked if he's someone that sits around that mid to high 90s average again. And if you want to take a stab on him in draft, like, so be it. It's just not going to be one for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. Tim Ashworth sent through a super chat as well earlier, so thanks, mate. Just asking, can I join your head-to-head leagues? I haven't made any leagues yet. I'm not doing that probably until February, March. I've got too much else to plan and stuff like that. But no, definitely, Tim, if we do a head-to-head league, mate, I'll send you through a code. But I appreciate the super chat nonetheless, mate. Thanks for tuning in. But that'll do it. It's been a very, very long episode, probably the longest one I've been a part of on but I feel like this was almost one, if there was going to be one long, it was probably going to be defenders. So obviously next week we'll be back for our midfield episode, which will be a lot of fun as well. I've got plenty of players I want to be discussing in that as well there. So make sure you guys tune to that. Obviously we're live every Sunday night leading up to the season, throughout the season, then obviously AFLW. So we're live every Sunday pretty much until like the end of October, like November time, around there. So yeah, we're going to be live a lot. So make sure you guys, if you're listening on pod and want to tune in live, head over on a Sunday night. We're very, very likely to be live there as well. But obviously, closing thoughts. Obviously, Chris, mate, thank you very much for jumping on as well with you, Liam. But Chris, mate, as I said, thanks for jumping on. Where can the people find you across the socials, and what can people be expecting leading up to the season from you?
Well, I'm not a big sharer, but yeah, Chris Burnham 5 is my X handle. And I'll answer any questions that anyone's kind of got. But to be honest, I feel like the fantasy community out there, I feel like whatever I give the answer, it's probably similar to those. It's just picking and choosing the right advice, I would say. You consume all the content, and then go your own way where you think.
Beautiful. No, thanks, mate. Thanks for jumping on, and I'm sure we'll chat to you again and get you on at some point during the season as well. Liam, mate, thanks once again for jumping on. Where can the people find you across the socials? And obviously with the AFLW, obviously in the off-season break, sort of when do you guys reckon content might be picking up for that?
Look, Bales, you're asking a great question to which I do not have the answer. I don't know when Free Kick is going to be back, and it's the middle of January and everyone's on holiday, so I think it'll be a while before we do know the answer. You can find me on Twitter at Liam AFLW Fantasy. I'm not going to be as bold as Chris and say that I will answer every question that gets sent my way, but I might answer some of them. Like Chris, that was a very dangerous thing to say as the most recent winner of the highlights. Yeah. But you're probably more likely to see me involved in Twitter fights about how bad Elijah Sardis is at kicking. So if you enjoy that, then give me a follow.
Beautiful. No, thanks, Liam. And Chris can have 50 message requests on X after we finish this.
So dangerous. So dangerous.
Yeah. But thanks, Liam. Oh, beautiful. As I said, thanks, Liam, mate. And I'm sure, again, we'll hear from you throughout the season as well on here. Jordox, mate, as always, thanks very much for jumping on. Where can the people find you?
Yep, I'm on X as well, at Jordox 2020. And I know it's been a long pod because when we started, it was light in here and now it's pitch dark. So that tells you we're just about done. But yeah, great to meet you, Chris. First time I've chatted with you, and great to chat again, Liam. Always love your insights. And Bales, I'm sure we'll be chatting soon, mate.
Yeah, no, thanks, mate. And you can find me at BAILSDT across the socials, and you can find us at AFL Fantasy Fans. As I said before, if you can smash a like on the video as well to get 100 on the video here, and if you can subscribe as well so we can hit that goal of 3,000 subscribers before the start of the season, that'd be very much appreciated. We also do have a Facebook group as well. So if you go request there, just 3 answers in terms of favourite fantasy player, favourite team, and 3 guests have been on the show. Please don't request with no answers because I will have to, unfortunately, decline because we've had a lot of bots that asked to jump on. So please answer questions if you join, but we want as many people as possible chatting fantasy in the group as well. So make sure you jump in there. And also links for Chris and Liam's socials are in the description below as well. But as I said, we're back next Sunday for a midfield episode. Really looking forward to that. But until then, guys, have a very good week coming up, and we will chat to you same time, same place next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week. See ya.
So, yeah.
Thanks, guys.